These chronology units, the DQ6, are the best chronology units I've ever heard in my life. I've heard a lot of chronology units. I've had quite an extensive past with chronology unit, and these are one of the best, if not the best. I would say go as far as to say these are the best chronology units I've ever heard, and you'll find out soon in this review why that is. But before we get to that, just disclaimer before we start the review, I bought this unit brand new from a seller on Tokopedia, which is a local marketplace. I'm not affiliated to any brand or any store, and yeah, so this review is completely of my own opinion. And yeah, so where do I start? So just a TLDR of the Technology DQ6. I still get that model name wrong all the time. The DQ6 are a U-shape IEM. Technicalities are, I would say, in this price range, adequate, a bit lower compared to the TIN-T2s and BL01s. Overall, these are the best technology units I've ever heard. They don't have that typical super V-shaped treble intense boomy super bass thing that Knowledge Zenith is usually known for, which I don't know how Knowledge Zenith even tunes their IEMs. I'm guessing that they just throw shit at the wall and just hope something sticks, but I think that they might have hit something here. I think something actually stuck on that wall. Like, it's quite good, and fitting is also quite okay. The ear tips that the come with the DQ6 are one of the newer ear tips I've seen from Knowledge Zenith, and we'll just go into more detail once we get into the full review. So yeah, we'll just start off with bass like we usually do. And the bass of the DQ6 is one of the things that I did not expect to have on a $20 Knowledge Unit IEM. The bass is quite controlled. It has more sub bass than it does mid bass. Both of them are emphasized, but the sub bass is more present. Slam on the sub bass is also quite good. It's not the best slam in the world, but it's quite present. So if you like to listen to a lot of sub bass EDM, I think these will fit you fine. Mid bass is a bit more pulled back. There's a little less mid bass than there is sub bass. Punch on the mid bass also isn't the sharpest that is there, but for this price, I'm not gonna be complaining much. Speed is also okay. It's not the fastest IEM in the world, but for $20, and especially for a IEM that is tuned in such a way, a U-shaped IEM, these don't fall behind that easily. I think for medium to fast music, these will do just fine. Faster music such as Dragon Force and such, these will definitely not do. But I think for most music, you'll be covered just fine. And bleed into the mid-range, which is usually also a problem with Knowledge Zenith, is that they don't have a lot of bleed into the mid-range. There is still bleed present, but not a lot. And it's quite interesting. I'm genuinely surprised with how, I don't know if they've improved in tuning IEMs or they were just lucky, like I mentioned earlier. But yeah, I'm genuinely surprised. Now, when we get into the mid-range, like I mentioned, there's not a lot of bleed into the mid-range. The mid-range is, I think, just there. It's not too thick, not too thin. Maybe for male vocals, you might think that it's a bit too thin because I think the lower mid-range isn't that forward. No thickness is not that thick. Overall, in the mid-range, I think they're quite clear, quite detailed. Separation is okay, I would say. Detail is a bit less than I would want, but for a Knowledge Zenith, I'm not gonna be I'm not gonna be expecting much. They don't do detail anyway most of the time. And the only problem that I have with the DQ6 in the mid-range is just the upper mids. The upper mids can sometimes be a bit harsh sometimes. It's not an issue most of the time, but if you listen to a lot of J-pop or badly recorded music, these will show them more than you would normally perceive on other IEMs, which might be a good thing if you like that. There is quite some bite in the upper mid-range, I would say. And yeah, overall in the mid-range, there's not a lot of things to complain about, which is rare with the Knowledge Unit. There's no mid-bass bleed. It's quite clear. It's more on the warm side of things, but it's not too thick. So and it's quite clear. Sometimes I would say, sometimes in the upper mid region, like I mentioned earlier, it does get a bit harsh. And not only does it get harsh, sometimes it just sounds a bit compressed also. But I'll just give it a pass for a Canal Zenith at this price. I'll give it a pass. I'm not going to be complaining that much. The only problem, the only real big problem that I see is what comes next, which is the treble. As if you've probably had a Canal Zenith, or you've ever read a review of a Canal Zenith, most of the time people will be complaining about the treble, because Canal Zenith, for whatever reason, likes to crank up the treble to the maximum that they can humanly allow, and just keep doing that for some reason. Because I guess it's because it gives a perception of detail, of enhanced detail, that really doesn't really exist, because it's just more treble. I think a lot of newbies, a lot of new audiophiles that go into the scene, usually they attribute detail to enhanced treble, especially something that sounds as harsh as the Knowledge Zenith lineup. So I guess that's probably why they're still doing that, I guess. Yeah. So it's your fault, the Knowledge Zenith enthusiasts. If you're wondering why Knowledge Zenith keeps on doing that shitty treble, that's your fault. But anyway, speaking of the treble of the DQ6, the treble of the DQ6 only has a bit of a problem, I think, in the 7K-ish region. Aside from that, I don't really have a lot of complaints. It's a bit more subdued in the treble. It's not as emphasized as a normal Knowledge Zenith would be. It's a bit emphasized. But extension I would say extension isn't that great. Extension, it cuts off quite early. For my ears, it cuts off at around 12-13K-ish. And anything beyond that, anything beyond 17K, I'm not able to hear, because my ears are limited to 17K. Detail in the treble also isn't the best. I would say even in this price range, the detail in the treble isn't the best. That it loses to something like the Tin T2s, and I think even to the Blonde BL01s, but it's not too lacking. And if you feel that the treble is absolutely detailless, it's not detailless, it's just that it's quite de-emphasized compared to other Knowledge Zenith models and most other IEMs in this price range. So you might have a harder time hearing detail in the treble for the DQ6. But in my case, I think it's fine. It's not the most detailed IEM in the treble, but it's alright. Now we're gonna be talking about soundstage and imaging. Where on earth are my images? So the soundstage of the DQ6 is also quite interesting for me. So if this were my head, the soundstage of the DQ6 sound more wide than they do deep. They go outwards from the left to right quite a bit more than outside of my head, like around here. But they feel like there's not a lot of depth in here. The center of the sound oftentimes feels just a bit more forward than the center of my head, but it goes quite wide. So it feels a bit awkward sometimes listening to music. It feels like it's in your head, but it goes quite wide. But it might appeal to you. I don't know. Maybe it does. It's probably one of the biggest weak points of the DQ6, I would say. But with binaural recordings, this does feel quite great, because it feels even more expansive than you would normally hear on other IEMs, which have normal soundstage. But yeah, imaging, I would say, it's quite weak. Imaging is at best 45-ish degrees in accuracy, which is alright I would say acceptable-ish. 45. I wouldn't say that I'm able to perceive at 45-ish degree accuracy. It's probably even less than that. I would say probably like 55-ish degree. I can't really get an accurate number beyond that, because everything just kind of blurs in. Yeah. And yeah, so we'll now just get into a bit of the accessories and the build quality of the Knowledge Zenith DQ6s. And the DQ6s, they come in this normal Knowledge Zenith box. the same that they've been using for years upon years. I've seen this box for probably more than 4 years now. They've used it from all the way in the beginning where they still sold their ZSTs, which was back in what, 2017, I guess. I'm not able to open this box. This is one problem I keep having. If you don't have really long nails or something, you can't open this tab. But yeah, it's probably just my problem. Yeah, it doesn't really come with a lot of accessories. You just get the IEMs, you just get the cable, and you get some spare ear tips. You get 3 pairs of ear tips. 3 pairs of ear tips, which are these new Chronology Zenith ear tips. So usually you get these Starline ear tips, which are these ear tips. These newer ear tips are quite wide bore. I don't know for which IEMs that they are providing these ear tips now. I don't think that all the models have these ear tips, but these new ear tips are quite a bit softer than the older Starlines. But they don't feel up to par to something like the Sony hybrids, or let's say something like Orthophone, which I think these are inspired by, considering the color and the pliability. And these ear tips, albeit they are quite soft, they kind of retain their shape quite well, so that softness actually kind of backfires sometimes, or depending on the shape of your ear. So sometimes it's quite hard to get a seal on your ear, depending on the shape of your ear. So you have to try that out, or just swap these out for other ear tips. But seeing that Knowledge Zenith actually is trying to improve with their products, I am glad to see that at least they've tried changing their ear tips from their Starlines, which for me the Starlines are quite horrible stock. Unless you invert them, they just feel very rough. It's like putting rocks on your ears or something like that. It's like putting plastic bottle on your ears. I don't know. And yeah, by the way, I got the model which has a microphone. There is a microphone-less model, so that's probably even cheaper than $20. It's probably even less. I don't know if it is or not. Chronology Zenith uses a proprietary 0.75-ish cable, which is a which uses a recessed connector, and there's a protrusion from the shell with the connector. The overall fit of the DQ6s feel a bit weird. The cable kind of hits the top of my ear here, just here on the connector, so it kind of gets uncomfortable over a long period of time. But I don't think that everyone will have the same problem as I do. My ears are a bit medium to big sized. Yeah, the shell on the Chronology Zenith DQ6s though, they are quite nice looking. Like, these are the most attractive Chronology Zenith's original design Chronology Zeniths that I've ever seen. A lot of the other models that Chronology Zenith has are usually just, they share OEMs with CCA and all those things, and they have pretty much the same shape most of the time. They just iterated upon the ZST, ZSN shapes, and just, it's quite boring to see. And especially this dark gray color, it looks absolutely great, I would say. I don't know if this, I'm pretty sure this is plastic. I don't know why I'm questioning that. It is plastic, and it also has some sort of like vent. I don't know if it actually vents anything. I haven't taken this apart, but I assume it does, because the isolation on the DQ6s isn't the best. It doesn't isolate that well. Fitting overall, I would say it's great, but with the included ear tips, these become more of a shallow fit IEM. So if you are worried that, if you're one of those person who had just started using IEMs and don't like IEMs going way too deep into the ears, this will probably do. But for other people who know that you usually prefer more deeper insert IEMs with the included ear tips, it probably won't fit you well. You'll probably need one ear tip size above the usual ear tip size that you have. For me, I usually use M size. I had to use L sized with the included ear tips, but if I used any other ear tip, it would be fine, because these go a bit further back compared to other ear tips. So yeah, I don't know how durable these shells are. I haven't tried smacking them, but you can definitely see the lines where stuff was glued on and stuff here. So I don't know how good these will last. And Chronology Zenith isn't the best in terms of, they're not really well known for build quality. Let's just all be honest here. And they have this usual, there's a running joke in the community that Chronology Units have detachable nozzles because their nozzles usually break quite easily. So you might be want to be a bit more careful when switching ear tips with these. The nozzle itself though does fit all the usual ear tips that are there. The spin fit, CP100s, all those things, and those fit here just fine. And yeah, I think that covers pretty much all about the shell of the IEMs. The cables usually just the normal Chronology unit cable that has a microphone. It's a bit stiff, not really that stiff, but it has an angled connector. These cables, the silver cables, usually oxidize quite easily, so you might want to keep that in mind. So they'll probably turn green at some point. And yeah, it's the user Chronology unit cheap cable. I don't know what else I can explain. I don't think they've really changed that much over the years, which is, I mean, it's alright. I don't really care much about the included cable because usually I just swap them out anyway. But they're usable, definitely usable, but not the best. You might want to just get a Chronology unit upgrade cable or something like that, especially considering that you might want to have, considering how microphonic these are. And yeah, I just don't really like those cables. And you probably have to get a Chronology Zenith cable because they use that proprietary 0.75 millimeter connector, which needs a recessed pin connector. Yeah, just keep that in mind. So we'll just do a quick comparison on other things that are in this price range. So a bit lower in the price range is the Chronology Zenith ZSTX. These are quite well known in the community. These are V-shaped garbage. There's no other way to say it. Treble is just ever so present. It goes everywhere. Mid bass just blooms all everywhere, anywhere. It just bleeds into the mid range. Sub bass is also a bit present, but extension is better on the DQ6. Slam feels a bit bigger on the ZSTX, but that's just because it's a bit more emphasized. Mid bass is also more emphasized on the ZSTX, but it feels a bit blunt. So my camera just overheated again, but yeah, anyway, so the overall detail of the ZSTX is less than the DQ6s, so we can just get this out of the way. There's just no reason to pick the ZSTX except if you like the color and the shape of the ZSTX. There's just no other reason to get the ZSTX. Or if you like the ear piercing treble, then yeah. And yeah, so aside from that, we'll just compare it quickly to other IEMs like the Blonde BL01s. The 01s definitely win in terms of detail, raw detail. Tonality, I would say overall, if you can withstand treble, the BL01s overall sound a bit better. They sound less compressed in the upper mid treble region, and the treble, well, it's quite a bit more intense. I think the DQ6s are more safer sounding than the BL01s, which is not a sentence that I ever expected to say with the Chronology Zenith. I never expected to say that at any point in my life, but here we are. And yeah, overall bass speed, I think the BL01s are also a bit quicker. There's a bit less sub bass on the BL01s, and mid bass feels a bit more present on the DQ6s. Yeah, ever so slightly. Mid range overall, I think the BL01s have to take the win. The BL01s mid range, I think, just sounds a bit better. It sounds a bit smoother. It also has a bit more. It sounds a bit more thick than the DQ6s. But yeah. And last but not least, we'll compare it a bit to the TIN T2. The TIN T2 on overall technicalities, they absolutely beat the DQ6s. The TIN T2 up until now are still one of my benchmarks in terms of raw technical performance in this price range. But overall tonality, I will take the DQ6s any time of the day, because the Thin T2 just sounds a bit, they just sound thin and bright. They're not the best sounding IEM that I've ever heard, but they're just quite great in terms of technical performance. But yeah, as an overall package, I would pick the DQ6s. If detail is not your priority, if you don't mind the recessed-ish treble and a bit of a peak, a bit harsh upper mids, and you like the looks of the DQ6s, and you like quite a bit of bass, you can get the DQ6s. I've never in my life ever thought that I would recommend the Acknowledged Zenith, but so anyway, I think that does it for the review. Like if you liked it, subscribe if you want more content like this, and see you guys next time.